MedBix Webcast is a new kind of healthcare media channel to break the silo mentality and foster interdisciplinary thinking. Our mission is to fill that gap and to create a curiosity through different lenses, tapping the passion that guided the historical figures in medicine and bringing present-day groundbreaking research to the front lines. We interview physicians and leaders in the industry about present-day healthcare challenges on our live programming. Hello, welcome to the MedBix Webcast. This is Ramana Annamaraju. I'm the host. I'm not Albert Einstein. Maybe my guest is, you can get closer to the Einstein, Albert Einstein. I'm a physics graduate and I've spent 3 decades in healthcare. But, when I started this podcast, actually, my intention was combine the physics and healthcare together. I wanted to see a common interface. Why physics is such an important role in medicine. So nature talks about the nature is exploring all the nature. The physics is exploration of a nature, and then the medicine is finding out the diseases and everything about the people. So there is a common intersection there. That's what I want to bring it to the. That's why I started this podcast. The doctor that I'm introducing you is the son of his father is a physician and mother is a physicist. What else? What a great combination. My father is a doctor, village doctor, and I'm a physicist. There is a lot of common things there. But I tell you, that is such a great intellectual cross section. That's what he said in his book. His name is Dr. Jonathan Fisher. He's joining from Charlotte, North Carolina. He is a Harvard-educated cardiologist. So I'm going to let me bring him to the stage, in the front stage. Okay, Doctor. Welcome to the Dr. Fisher. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Ramana. Nice to be with you. Thank you so much for the invitation. And I love the Einstein music when we were coming into the show.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you a little bit about your, a funny question, but don't think it is offensive. But what time you realized that you're not catching up with your mother, then following your father's footsteps? Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit about that.
My mother was a quantum physicist, and she worshipped Albert Einstein. And so when I was growing up, we had one huge poster of Einstein on the wall with his wild gray hair. This was in our living room, and his gray sweatshirt when he was in his Princeton days. And so I was a little boy, and I looked up and I said, "Who is this man, and what's he doing in our house?" And my mother explained that he was perhaps the greatest physicist and scientist of all time. And she wanted to be just like him. And I suppose I wanted to be just like her in some way.
That's very good. That is so. But he took all your family. Can you give us a little bit background about your personal and professional background? Your family, all the doctors, and you talk about in your book. And we'll talk about that in a second.
Absolutely. Do you see over here? There's a little black case. This is a doctor's bag from about 60 years ago. And my father was the town doctor for a very small town in New Jersey. And so if someone had a problem, whether it was a sprained knee or a chest pain or a pneumonia, they would call up the house and he would get in the car and drive over to their house back in the day of house calls in the 1950s and 1960s. And my mom and dad had lots of children. I'm one of 7. And each child, when they were old enough, would start going on house calls to visit the sick in our town. And one by one, everyone went to become a doctor after that. And I grew up with this. This was my reality. I didn't know anything else except for my mother, who was a scientist. And eventually, I made a choice as well to follow in my father's footsteps because he's a great man.
Let me just, So, you followed, that the thing that I wanted to ask you about that you wrote that what inspired you to write this book, and you made extraordinary journey. Actually, before that, my
Hmm.
father used to carry the same bag. In fact, in the village,
Ah,
similar bag at least.
yeah.
Um, I wanted to ask you what this extraordinary journey. I interview a lot of cardiologists. They talk about all these about the heart and the structure of the heart and all
Hmm.
those function of the heart. But you went into the different direction. You
Hmm.
explored a lot of Eastern philosophies. Tell us what that journey, what it take, why it took you to that side of the
Yeah.
journey.
Yeah, I began loving physics. My mother would stay up with me and help me with my homework, and I loved my physics teachers and doing all the experiments. And I always knew that when I was deciding on my career, I would do something with science. I didn't know what it was, and also something where I would help other people. So it was natural to become a doctor for me. But when I had to choose among the specialties, it became very clear which organ in the body was the one that was most interesting to me. And it was the one with the most physics, because the heart moves. It's constantly pumping and twisting and turning. It has an electromagnetic field that's very powerful. There's fluid dynamics, there are shear forces. And so for me, it was kind of a natural attraction there. The problem was that even as I was studying everything to know about the physical heart, I, in my training in medical school and residency, was experiencing a lot of confusion about my emotions. I felt loneliness, I felt anxiety, I felt eventually real sadness and depression, and I had no idea why. And I knew that the emotional heart was the metaphorical heart, but eventually, when I would become anxious, I would feel it in my chest, like a tightness in the chest or a quickening. And then as I was feeling that, I started seeing patients who we were doing everything right, but they were feeling symptoms in the chest caused by emotions. So the emotional heart was affecting the physical heart. And I became fascinated by this because it was affecting me and my patients. And I spent the last 10 years reading everything I could find about the other dimensions of the heart. And so now I firmly believe, after talking with 50 experts for this book in mind body medicine, that the heart has four dimensions: the physical heart, the emotional heart, the social heart, and the spiritual heart. And these used to be metaphors. Every world tradition has some role for the heart to play, whether it's Chinese or Japanese, Buddhist, Hindu, Sufi, you name it. Every world religion has a very central role of the human heart. And I became fascinated as I was on my own spiritual journey about the connection between the scientific and spiritual.
Let us talk about, just you mentioned all the Hinduism and Sufism a little bit. Let us talk about that. I'm a Hindu. I grew up as a Hindu, very Orthodox Hindu family.
Mm,
That the Jnana Yoga is one of them that talk about the heart and everything. But
mm,
one religion that one, my friend got married to Iranian Sufi in Stanford. She
mm,
was talking about, one day she was talking about heart is the center of the Sufism. I didn't, that she tried to convince me that heart is the most important than even the brain. So
mm,
I ignored her and I didn't pay. I could She could not convince me about that part. After reading that your book, and then I was really, came up with a different dimension for that.
mm.
So tell us, in Sufism, the heart is a center of the spirituality, center of the purification and everything.
Yeah,
So there are some religions like Sufism and the Jnana Yoga in India, in the parts of Hindu and Jewish probably.
yeah.
So what are these religions connection with the heart?
It goes back thousands of years. So before we had modern science, before we understood what was happening inside the physical heart, man had to discover what was happening there. And so, whether we're talking about the Hindu gods or the Jewish god or the Christian or the Muslim god, man was trying to explain the universe by looking to this godlike force. And at the same time, we were experiencing feelings in our own body. When we would feel great awe, for example, we would see a rainbow in the sky, we might feel something in the chest. And so early humans immediately associated that the emotion was coming from the heart itself. This is long before neuroscience, long before functional MRI scans, long before the field of psychology. And so, no matter which tradition you look at, humans had a hierarchy, so a rank order of organs in the human body. And for many, many years, the heart was at the top of the hierarchy. But as early dissections were done, beginning over 2,000 years ago in Rome, the human heart was exposed, or the animal heart was exposed, and they didn't see God in there. And the scientists didn't see a spirit in there. And so Western scientists started to see the heart as purely a machine, as a mechanical pump, even though Eastern traditions, all of them, saw the heart as something much greater, including the Egyptians. When the ancient Egyptians died, the mummification process would remove all of the organs in the body, but one was placed back in the body so that it would travel into the afterlife with the one who had died, because the heart would be measured by the god, Ma'at, to see whether the person lived with virtue. And then skipping forward, back in the last few hundred years, neuroscience and psychology has really come into play. And with modern imaging, there has been now a preference for the brain over the heart. And so we tend to think about wisdom and information as only coming from the brain. I'm trying to make the case that we have to honor the intelligence that comes from the heart and many emotional experiences that are dependent on the beating heart itself.
Dr. Fisher, I was reading your book. I'm intrigued by that. What you said is that in the book, the heart plays a very active participant in the communication with the brain. So, Hindu religion, mind is a bigger one, and actually, mind and the universal consciousness and all those things. So, what is the heart? And tell us a little. I am not that familiar with that, the communication between you're a cardiologist. You could explain what is the communication between the heart and a two-way communication between the heart and the brain. Can you tell us a little, expand on that one?
Yeah, I can explain it. And I want to begin by saying that philosophers have wrestled for 1,000 years with a problem. And the problem is, how can we describe a connection between something we can't touch or see, like a thought or a feeling or a belief or a spirituality, and something that we can touch or see, something that has a physical property? In other words, the beating heart or electrons in the brain. And so this is known as the mind-body problem, the mind-heart problem. And one way to work around this mind-body problem is to look at the visible, measurable activity in the brain and in the heart. And when we do that, we can see that there are three pathways where the mind affects the heart. And it's a two-directional pathway. So we used to think that our thoughts would cause our feelings, but we actually know that it's a cycle, two directions. In the same way that I can have a thought of the future and start to worry and have an emotion of fear come up, I can also see something out of the corner of my eye that makes my heart beat faster. My brain notices that emotion and creates a story around it, and the brain generates fear, and then the cycle perpetuates. So there are three pathways that connect the mind and the heart. There are activities in the mind, neurochemical and electrical activities that occur, and the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system are activated or deactivated depending on the event. The second is there are changes in the body when we have an emotion or a belief or an attitude or a thought. Our blood vessels can either constrict or relax depending on whether we feel threatened or safe. Our heart can go faster or slower depending on whether we feel threatened or whether we feel safe and connected. Our respiratory rate. So every organ in the body has evolved to respond to emotions. And so the first step happens in the mind, the second are changes in the body, and the last connection between our thoughts and our heart have to do with our behavior. So if I see you and you see me and you are immediately afraid of me because I don't look like someone you know, you are then going to avoid me and you will experience something in your physical heart. maybe it's fear, maybe it's anger, maybe it's resentment. And then we won't have a relationship. So, as a core human need for connection, the spiral is going downward now, and the emotion becomes stronger. So, our mind, our body, and our behavior all are talking in both directions between the mind and the heart.
You said that in your some of the things, brain's negative bias. That let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah.
That is a like accumulation of a bad things because brain wants to protect the body, so it accumulates all the bad stuff in one place, right? So
Mm.
can you
Yeah.
expand on that one a little bit more?
Yeah, I think this requires that we go back a few million years before we were fully evolved humans, when we were just maybe an organism. And an organism in a petri dish has two choices. It can either try to run away from something that's poisonous, like poisonous chemical or something else, or if there's sugar or a resource, it can go towards it. So it's a very basic reflex that goes back to the beginning of life. And we humans have continued to have our primary rule is to avoid danger, to avoid threat. And because of this, our brains have to make very quick decisions, and our brains are wired to make mistakes. So our brains have a choice. We can make a mistake where we assume that everything is safe, everything is friendly, or we can make a mistake where we judge certain things as dangerous or potentially harmful. And we are wired to make the second mistake in order to keep safe. But making that second mistake keeps us in a state of often of fear, of avoidance, and of perceiving threats around us when we often have no threats. And that leads to chronic stress, that negativity bias.
Yeah, yes, you get older, you pile up all these negative emotions, all the negative bias. That what you say. That's one of the problems as you're getting older. All these negative thoughts and the brain wants to protect you, so that's all is piling up. How do we solve that problem, Doctor Fisher?
Yeah. We don't wait until we get older. We teach our children. So one of the ways we can either solve it for as we are older, or we can look and see what is the root of the problem. And the root of the problem is human suffering. The root of the problem is interpreting experiences in ways where we feel threat, where we may not be threatened, is experiencing fear, envy, greed, loneliness, etc. So if we teach our children to properly interpret reality and experiences without the negativity bias, let's say, or in order to overcome the negativity bias, they won't fall into that. Um, we can talk a long time about how do we overcome that negativity bias. And I think the very first step is to be aware that it exists.
Correct.
The second step is to be honest with ourselves and say, am I a positive person or am I a negative person? Am I the person who's always looking for the negative, always criticizing and judging and assuming the worst things are going to happen? Putting it simply, am I a pessimist? Do I think the worst will happen? And there is now a lot of research, a lot of evidence that says if you want to have a healthy heart, you have to be an optimist. You have to look for the best in situations and work towards a positive outcome. Because if you're a pessimist and you have a problem with your heart, you're less likely to take good care of yourself. You're more likely to give up. You're more likely to experience chronic stress and fear. And so these are just some of the ways. But the question you're asking, which is how do we work with negative emotions, that is the work of a lifetime. And that's what every spiritual tradition, whether it's Buddhism or Hinduism or Judaism, that's the purpose, is to help us work with these human experiences, these human emotions without getting carried away. And this is the work of the Stoic philosophers and other philosophers as well.
So let us talk about a little bit of a structural process, that vagus nerve. You mentioned a little bit of vagus nerve. What is the role of a vagus nerve in the whole process in this brain-heart communication, Dr. Fisher?
Yeah. So the vagus nerve is the longest nerve in the human body. And I think it's the most important one. It's called vagus because to vagus is to wander. And the nerve originates in the brain. It's the 10th cranial nerve coming from the brain. And it wanders all the way down. It touches the heart, and then it touches the esophagus and the stomach, and it goes down into the intestines. This single nerve connects the brain with almost the entire inside of our body. Our understanding of the vagus nerve has changed. We used to think that the vagus was something that the brain would use to control the body. But we now know that the vagus nerve gives information from the body to the brain just as much or even more than the brain gives instructions from the vagus to the body. And we can talk a lot more about the vagus nerve and why it's so important for the heart.
Yeah, that is a definitely interesting thing. So what is some mystery behind it? What is that mystery, that Vegas knows mystery? People talk about it a little bit. Is there any mystery there, or is it
Mm,
basically two-way communication? What kind of information,
mm,
if you quantify that information, what kind of
mm.
information this Vegas knows is sending back and forth?
Yeah, so there still is a good deal of mystery around the vagus nerve. The most recent theory, which is now over 30 years old, was put forth by Dr. Stephen Porges, who said that we don't understand the vagus nerve. There is not just one vagus nerve. The vagus has two branches, as he puts it, what's called the dorsal branch or the top branch and the ventral branch. And the ventral branch of the vagus nerve, according to this theory called the polyvagal theory, is unique to mammals and primates. And this ventral branch of the vagus nerve is the main route by which you and I connect emotionally. Because when my vagus sends a signal from my brain to my heart and my body that I am safe, my heart slows down, my eyes are more open, my ears are more attuned to the different range in your voice, and I am primed to be receptive to communicate with you and you with me. But if my vagus nerve is active in a different way, if my dorsal branch, the top branch, is active instead, I am not going to be loving and open and connecting, as according to the theory. And this is still a bit of a mystery, but the theory is that I am going to almost freeze. If I'm scared, I'm going to almost freeze in my current position and not approach you because of activation of the dorsal branch of the vagus nerve. There are other factors as well. Yeah, and the
Very
cool thing
interesting.
about and the other thing about the vagus nerve is that you asked how do you measure the vagus nerve, and you can't measure the vagus nerve, but what is often used as a proxy is what's called heart rate variability, or HRV. And HRV is a substitute or a proxy for vagal nerve activity. The more active the vagus nerve is, the higher the heart rate variability. And the heart rate variability is the millisecond to millisecond changes in each heartbeat when we're breathing in and we're breathing out. And when we're in a state of relaxation, openness, or learning, our HRV can go up. When we're in a state of chronic stress, either from physical illness or external stress, our HRV goes down, and it's a measure of psychological resilience.
Dr. Fisher, this autonomic functions are, that there's a connected with the heart rate variability. Actually, I work with the devices that measure the autonomic function through the heart rate variability. So, what is I wrote an article recently about a sadhu yogi in India that I used to across my village, that he was there and hardly eating any food. So what is it possible hibernation of the human being? Can we do that? Is it
Mm,
possible that we can go into the hibernation and reduce the heart workload, reducing the workload of the heart and reducing the blood pressure and all autonomic
mm.
functions? Can our mind and brain can control the autonomic functions?
The short answer is absolutely yes. The mind and brain can influence the autonomic functions, and for many years for 1,000 years in the East, the yogis have done these practices where they slow themselves down and can be extremely still for hours or even days at a time. And what we know is that the heart rate slows down, the blood pressure lowers, the metabolic processes slow down in the body. But you don't have to be a yogi sitting in a cave. We know from studies on meditation today, where we look at EEG scanners and heart rate variability and heart rate, that when we are entering different states, and there are different levels of meditation, in the higher levels of meditation, we see the same relaxation response. What you're calling hibernation, I mean, we're not like a bear. We're not going to be totally asleep. But if we're practicing what was called the relaxation response, it was described by Dr. Herbert Benson, a physician at Harvard, and he showed that using meditation practice and certain yogic breath practices, we can slow our metabolism and we can reduce inflammation and reduce chronic stress. And so we don't have to spend a month. We can do it in 5 minutes, just together with breathing and meditation.
So tell us a little bit about the meditation. I'm not. I have a friend who is joining from Atlanta, Georgia. She is a very good. She's a meditation teacher. She's a close friend of mine. And Ursula Lentini, she's joining with us from Atlanta, Georgia. Ursula, welcome back. Let me bring her to the. So Ursula, welcome to the. So where is Ursula? Yeah, let me bring Ursula there. Yeah. Hey, Ursula, welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Fisher. I really respect your knowledge base and the way you simplify everything. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ursula. It's so nice to meet you, and thank you for that.
Yeah, Ursula was, I used to attend a Twin Hearts meditation in Atlanta, Georgia. I know her a long time. And, that's the reason I said that maybe she would be a great addition to this process. So what is the meditation effect on the body and heart and the mind? Can you expand, Dr. Fisher?
So just as we laid the foundation before about these three pathways that connect the mind and the heart, meditation does the same thing. So there are many imaging studies now using a technique called functional MRI over the last 30 years, beginning with the work of Richie Davidson at Wisconsin, showing that there are almost a dozen different centers in the brain, and we can discuss them, which are affected when we meditate. And it's worthwhile for saying that meditation is not one thing. Meditation, there are dozens of forms of meditation. There's religious meditation, secular meditation, breath meditation, seated meditation, walking meditation. There's yoga nidra, which is a form of almost pre-sleep meditation. So I think it's important to be clear that I'm not describing one result from every type of meditation. There's also something that I practice today. I was leading a group in what's called loving kindness meditation, which is a form of heart meditation. That has different effects than mindfulness meditation. But all that being said, Ramana, the experience is when we meditate, there are changes in our mind. Typically speaking, there's a downregulation or a quieting of the limbic system, the most ancient part of our primate reflex in the amygdala and other locations. And there can actually be an upregulation in the parts of our brain that sense what's happening in our bodies, what's called interoception or visceroception. There's a region called the insular cortex in particular, which connects the midbrain and the front brain. That becomes more active and stronger in meditators, which is why if you go to leadership training in any company in the world and they're teaching emotional intelligence training, what they're really teaching is a form of meditation as the base of that. And if you look at the work of Daniel Goleman, who described emotional intelligence, before he did any of that, he was a meditator, because meditation also increases our awareness of our bodily signals. And if we do certain types like loving kindness meditation, we then strengthen the parts of our brain that are responsible for understanding other people and caring about them, the prefrontal cortex on the left side. We could talk for hours on the physiologic effects of meditation, and I'm sure Dr. Ursula can say a lot on this.
Yeah. Before I give it to Ursula, let me ask you, what about how did you?
I thought I was going to get off of the hot seat here.
Yeah. What about the people who pose threat to us? Their deception, they practice deception, they practice negative things, and they wanted to hurt you. How do you? There is a reason anger to exist, right? The anger is existing for a reason. So how do you respond? how do you express that negative emotion towards them? That
Well, I hear three questions in that one question. One is, how do we live in a world where people are out to deceive us? What kind of attitudes might we hold that allow us to live in that same world? Two is, what do we do when anger arises? How do we work with that skillfully? And three is, how do we communicate with other people assertively? So depending on which way you want to go, we could talk about all three, but I'm going to stick with the first one because for me, that's really the most important, which is, and this is more of a spiritual question than a medical question. I firmly believe that to have peace in our hearts, we have to have a sense that we all share just one heart. Even people who are out to deceive us, they're doing the best that they can, given their circumstances. And I'm not doing that or saying that out of some form of naivete, where I believe that everyone is good. I'm choosing to have a belief about other people because it serves me and it allows me to connect with all people, eventually to love all people. Because unless I believe that, I can't love all people. And to love all people doesn't mean I'm going to turn my back on someone who's about to hurt me. To love someone may be to set firm boundaries or to keep my distance. And so, I took this into more of a spiritual, psychological direction. We could certainly talk about anger and assertive communication, which are very, very important in order to live in this world with other people.
Ursula, that's your game right now. Talk with the Ursula is one of the she's a doctor, Ursula Lentini. I know her for a long time. She's a very well read woman. I know I'm always fascinated. She's a close family friend. So Ursula, go ahead. Anything you want to talk with or questions?
Yeah, it warms my heart to see the medical profession speaking my language because Ramana and I, for years, he'll say, "Oh, in quantum science and the mechanics, we have all these forums and discussions. How do you know the answers?" And I said, because I'm coming from the spiritual context and spiritual references, where truth is truth, no matter what language or how we got there. So when we're seeking peace, which I'm hearing you say, Dr. Fisher, right? Like, I'm going to choose peace over fear.
Sorry to interrupt, Ursula. Can you check your microphone? It is moving. It is making a lot of noises.
Well, I don't know what's here. Oh, I know why. Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Now it's good.
I had my speaker in. When we're consciously choosing peace over fear, because that was basically the foundation of your primary question. It's easy to live in like you said, Dr. Fisher, we can have a first mistake of thinking everything's fine and rosy and not be afraid, or we can live in fear. And basically it's the yin yang symbol of how can we be both and be centered. So to walk in the world that is chaos and madness at the time, because we're going through a lot of shifts. Everything is a cycle. Nature has cycles. So we're doing a 2,000-year cycle, moving into the age of Aquarius, and it's going to require paradigms that have not been working to collapse. So we are fortunate enough to be in a time period where things, agreements, systems are collapsing. And the citizens, the children of these new generations are in the position to create on the fly new paradigms. But because systems like winter already knows how it behaves, so fall is like, oh my gosh, everything's falling apart. It's falling apart. And then winter's like, I got you. Don't worry. It's not death. It just looks bad. But we're doing some work behind the scenes.
Ursula, still we have a problem with your microphone.
Oh, I don't know why.
There's a lot of noises coming out, so just can you fix that? It's going to be, so let him answer that questions and then while you're fixing the problem.
Okay, I don't know what else to do.
Maybe rejoin again. Just turn
get off and rejoin?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Go ahead, Dr. Jeff.
Well, I'm trying to think of where I would even pick that up. Ursula was offering her own perspective on the cosmos and cosmic psychology, and that's not my area of expertise. So I'm happy to pick up anything you'd like to.
Yes, anyway, she has her own is some of the things that yeah. So another thing I wanted to ask you about the the last time I asked you, what is the research going on in the heart side? The people who get, can we do the transplantation? It is not your field, but I want to
Mm.
ask you, where is the status? Do you know something about it? What's going on?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the newest hope is potentially what's called xenotransplantation, which is using an animal's heart and transplanting it into a human, which has been tried with a pig heart with a very brief survival. But as you know, a different species, a different animal, the proteins on that organ cause an immune reaction in the receiving body. And so rejection continues to be the number one problem in transplantation, and it's really a limiting factor. So we can either place an artificial organ or we can place a foreign organ. We're not there yet, and I'm really focused on preventing hearts from failing in the first place. And I think we can really prevent a lot of disease of the heart, but we're missing the opportunity. And we're missing it because more than 70% of heart failure and heart disease could have been prevented by simple lifestyle choices. Lifestyle choices in terms of proper sleep, nutrition, exercise, relationships, stress management, and avoiding toxic substances. And I think those interventions are free, they're not complicated, and there are no side effects. And so this is, I think, where our healthcare system has to go. Transplantation from a pig to a human, it's a wonderful thing. There are some people who have moral and ethical issues that come up because of animal rights and these kinds of things. But I think right now the future is in prevention.
Absolutely. What is the nutrition? What kind of a nutrition play a role in the prevention? The
Yeah.
right food, or just tell us a little bit about that, Dr. Fisher.
Yeah, so I can tell you that whatever we talk about today in terms of nutrition, it's going to be proven a little bit inaccurate in a few years, because what we will find out is that we all respond a little differently to certain foods versus other foods. We have different sensitivities and reactivities. And so our genome, our genetic makeup, partly determines which foods our bodies like. But the vast majority of people, according to the research in the last 30 years, benefit from a mostly plant-based or plant-forward or plant-exclusive diet. And this is based on research from what's called the China study, work done by Dr. Dean Ornish. There are a number of researchers and studies that have shown that a plant-based diet in general is healthier for the heart than animal-based diet. In addition, we're not getting enough fiber in our diet. The typical American and Westerner maybe gets 5 grams or 10 grams of fiber a day. It's recommended to get 20 or nearly 30 grams a day in terms of our intestinal health and our heart health and other things. And then in terms of diet, we are eating too much sugar, too much processed foods. And this is because we're working against partly an addictive experience, which is something that's so sweet, it wasn't easily found a million years ago. And so nowadays, companies have found ways to package food and process it in a way that keeps us wanting more. And I struggle with this. I like my ice cream and my cookies, and it's very, very hard. And in the clinic, one of the biggest challenges right now is obesity. The epidemic of obesity is affecting 650 million people around the world. And it's rising dramatically. And it's partly because of poor nutritional choices and availability, and sedentary lifestyle, which affects 30% of all people in the world right now.
So, you spoke with Dr. Jen Fisher, I think, the same last name
Yeah.
as yours,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
about the Deloitte well-being officer. So
Yeah.
let us talk about the well-being officer. Don't you think there is a need for well-being officer for all the corporations? Not only even a small company should nominate somebody well-being officer. What do you think that the transformation of that kind of process?
Yes. So chapter 13 in my book, I describe a dozen leaders from around the world who lead using the wisdom of these traits of the heart that I describe in the second part of the book, including wisdom and openness and courage and warmth and empathy, all these good things. On the one hand, Ramana, I do believe that every organization now is realizing that unless they start focusing on the total well-being of the employees are going to leave and they can't get new hires. And those that are working there, if they're working so hard and they don't feel connected with their work, they start to disengage. It's like quiet quitting. And productivity goes down, and the bottom line goes down, and market share goes down unless we look at the well-being of the employee. So every successful company now is starting to measure the mental and physical and psychological and even spiritual well-being of the employee. And so Deloitte is looking at this, McKinsey's looking at this as well. And it's part of the work that I do is exactly this. I'm an executive looking at the well-being of a workforce of 38,000 employees. And we use all kinds of metrics to keep an eye and to see what we can do differently. But at the root of it, Ramana, is a much bigger problem. And this is, we are functioning in a modern capitalist system. And capitalism often drives greed. And greed is at odds with well-being. You can't be happy and greedy at the same time, at least not sustainably so. So I think there is a reckoning happening now in the Western world and the Eastern world as to how do we operate, how do we do business in a way that's, some people are calling it conscious capitalism. In other words, consciousness of our humanity and our interconnectedness and the need for human happiness at work, not just at home.
Yeah. So you endorse that well-being officer. All the companies should. We have a privacy officer for the HIPAA violations and all those things. Why can't we have a well-being officer for the corporations? That is such a needed requirement. In fact, as you say, that is such an important part of it, right?
Yeah. So not only is it something that I would recommend, this is something now in healthcare that is a best practice. This is a recommendation, whether it's the Surgeon General or the American Medical Association. Every healthcare system needs to have a chief well-being officer and eventually, ideally, a team whose job it is to look at the operations of the system and seeing the human factors that are causing employees disconnection, burnout, and disengagement, and to fix those operational factors so that people can come to work and feel a sense of purpose and connection.
I'm in the center of technology here. Technology is a beneficial for us, and also at the same time it created a tremendous amount of pressure around the world. So tell us a little bit about what do you think of your perspective on technology's role in our advances, or what is the impediment that we are having right now?
Generally, as a human being, I love technology. I think this is part of how we've advanced from being a caveman, starting with old stone tools. That was technology back then. Now technology is large language models and artificial intelligence. Generative AI is the hot topic right now. These technologies have the potential to improve human health. They also have the potential to make it worse. So technology by itself is neutral. You can use it well or poorly. If I am looking for technology to try to make you healthier, I'm wasting my time. But if I start by looking at the human body and the human mind and the human spirit and asking what is needed but is not being given, is being disconnected, and then finding technology to fill that gap, I think that's a better solution. But at least as far as AI, let's say, for example, AI has the potential to fill a gap in our healthcare system where we can deploy it to areas where they don't have access to medical care, and they can have an AI bot answering basic medical questions and triaging. They can have humans can have devices, a wearable technology that measures anything you want to measure, feeds it into an AI algorithm, which then gives a high-level summary to a physician somewhere who can treat the patient virtually. So I think technology can either get in the way of human care or it can accelerate it. But it's a very, very exciting time.
I spoke with the Dr. Robert Pearl about the Chat GPT MD. He wrote a book.
Yeah.
So he was talking about the artificial intelligence. But anyway, what do you think of that emotions that artificial intelligence can emulate in the future? What is the threat of artificial intelligence? Because you're proponent of technology seems to be, but there is a lot of pressures. Even I'm a fairly good in technology, but I feel pressure when I'm putting together this podcast, this technology, that something that is not working, the mouse is
Mm.
maybe not working. All these pressures are there. Where we stop, who is watching that? These are the good or bad. There must
Mm.
be a society, a organization to look at it and see which ones are good or bad, right? Do you agree with that?
Yeah. Yeah, I do. And I think that you and I are having this conversation right now and helping guide the conversation. Um, so, Robert Pearl is one of the world experts in this area. He wrote an entire book about how ChatGPT is potentially going to replace physicians in many areas. Um, you asked a specific question, which is, what about AI and emotions? And you used the right word, which is emulate. A robot, an AI, doesn't feel anything. It doesn't have a heart to feel. And so anything that you receive from AI is just a simulation of an emotion. But that doesn't mean it's not effective. And there has been a research studies now which show that a patient that is encountering either a physician or an AI bot, and each one is answering a question. Do you know which one most people prefer to get an answer from?
Don't tell me this is a robot.
Yeah, absolutely. Significantly more people prefer the answer that is coming from AI than from an expert physician. And some of that is because the AI always gives a longer answer. And people think if it's a longer answer, it must be more thoughtful. Also, a robot knows how to emulate empathy very, very well. But not every physician either has the experience or the skill, and many physicians are experiencing burnout. So their empathy is much lower than an AI bot would be. And it's an interesting situation we're in.
But on the other hand, I tell you this: there is a champion, AlphaGo, the winner of AlphaGo. The AlphaGo is a deep mind that Google's computer beat the human being in Go, and the millions of people cried on that day. They were emotional. They were so. It is really they're not supporting the robot at that time. They were really on the side of that guy who lost the AlphaGo game.
Mm.
What do you think in that? What do you measure? What is your perspective on that?
Yeah, well, my perspective is that humans don't want to be replaced. We want to feel useful. We want to feel powerful. And for many reasons, unless we continue to push ourselves as humans, push our brains to their maximum capacity and use our brains to their fullest, use our full human capacity, eventually the robots that we have, whether it's whichever company it is, the technology is rapidly advancing to take over many of the jobs that humans used to do.
You're talking about it. So one of the things is, in quantum physics also, more and more you study about it in the love and compassion, or the central role of you realize it even in the quantum physics. Those are the fundamentals. The Heisenberg uncertainty principle. Unless you observe it, nothing is real.
Mm.
So that they used to call that is Jewish physics, because the electron could be in two places same time. But now that is 70% of economy running in that one. Now you're giving a very different perspective on the heart, in the very
Mm.
very emotional kind of a
Yeah.
heart, and then you're giving abstract. But there is a very important role in the society and helping society,
Mm.
how it helps the individuals, how it helps the society as
Yeah.
in general. If you can expand that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think what we're talking about now is really, for me, the most important aspect of the heart. And it applies to our physical health, our societal well-being. It applies to political divides. And this is empathy and compassion, which are the elements of having a warm heart, which is what I write about in chapter 12. How do we live with a warm heart when the world feels so cold and there's so much conflict? And the important message is number one, we all have the capacity to strengthen our empathy and compassion for others. Even someone who says, oh, I don't really care about other people, I'm too busy, we can develop the capacity. The second piece is that empathy and compassion is good for our health. Empathy and compassion and love is good for our health. Individuals who have a stronger ability to develop loving relationships with others live longer. And this has been proven in every study that's been done on human longevity, whether it's the Harvard study on human happiness or the Blue Zones research by Dan Buettner. The single predictor of how long people will live is whether they have loving relationships and a community of belonging. And there's lots of reasons for that. So now we have an argument that compassion is essential for our health and longevity, but we also have a business case. And this was made beautifully by Dr. Steven Cesiak, who is the medical director at Cooper University, and he wrote a book called Compassionomics. And he explains in this book that businesses that make compassion a core value in their organization not only have happier employees, but are more competitive in the marketplace and more successful with the bottom line.
Let us start with the healthcare system itself in general. That is a purely lacking in compassion, empathy. They're dividing the patients by insurance company. They're dividing the patients by the wealth, and then if you know insurance or why we have that kind of a non-empathetic system that the healthcare practitioners in the healthcare system is doing right now. How can we change that? What is your as an advocate for the patients? What do you do for patients like that? How do you advocate that process?
Yeah. First, I have to say that while there certainly are individuals and systems where there's a lack of empathy and compassion, I've been so lucky to be in medicine for 25 years, and I've seen thousands of physicians and leaders who are guided by kindness, empathy, and compassion. And so I don't want to make any broad sweeping statements about healthcare being unkind or uncompassionate. And yet what you're talking about gets back to this fundamental problem. We are a capitalist society, and capitalism functions when there's competition. Capitalism functions when someone can take resources and amplify them. And sometimes it's not considered a win-win game. It's almost a zero-sum game. If I have to, for me to win, you have to lose. And when this happens in healthcare, we have a lot of losers. So the answer for me, and this is in my life in general, is I am not interested in fixing the whole healthcare system. No one person can do that. But if I focus on how I behave in my office and in my clinic and with my team and in my hospital and in my hospital system, this is how change happens in healthcare and anywhere else. It takes one individual, just one heart, to say, I've had enough of the system that isn't working. I'm going to try and do it differently. And so one conversation after another, I believe that's how change happens. And eventually we find leaders who are in positions of power and some authority that can make rapid changes by saying that compassion is our core value, right alongside with, let's say, profitability.
Well, yeah, I'm laughing because you're actually assuming the role of a leadership right now here, and saying being a leader, you're expressing that the leadership quality that is we need that change, a fundamental change in the organizational level. That what you're saying is, even though you're saying in the individual level changes, you're professing right now organizational resistance. You're showing up here.
Leaders matter for sure. Yeah, change has to happen from the grassroots, but it also has to happen from the top down. It's not an either or situation. I think we have to be open to change at all levels, and we have to inspire change. We have to make change feel good. And that's really, I think, the key of any change is we have to make people want to do it. Sometimes that means paying them more money, paying them based on how happy their employees are. Yeah. And there are other ways to motivate leaders.
Let us talk about a little bit we're coming to I will bring Naomi in a minute, but I wanted to ask you about the death. people go through the process of death, that you went through a personal, in your story of your own personal story. What is your profound, my father died and mother died, and it's a very profound, right, a loved
Yeah.
one's effect. How do you, what is a death means to you, and what is your perspective on that, in your
Yeah.
person, how do you deal with it?
It's a beautiful question. And right now, there's a lot of focus on longevity, human longevity. We have, without naming them, there's authors and podcasters, and the whole conversation is how can I live to be 150 years old? And I think that this is a bit of an obsession right now, and it's really avoiding the conversation that you're bringing up, which is how do we humans make peace with the fact that we are not going to live forever? Because the traditional approach, Ramana, in the West is once someone becomes old or frail, we put them away, we hide them in a nursing home somewhere, and we ignore them, and we shut them off from family, and we shut them off from friends until eventually they get sick and they die, and maybe we have a funeral, and then we move on with our lives. This is very different than traditional societies, where the grandparents live with the children who live with the grandchildren in the same house or in the same community. And when the grandparents are getting sick, they're not put in a corner. The grandchildren are taking care of them and feeding them until the day that they die. And then the family surrounds them, and they have a ritual and a ceremony saying goodbye to this life. And so I think in the West, because we have medicalized the dying process so much, we are now afraid of it and we run away from it. And it really makes it hard to get older in our society. And I think we don't do a good service of treating our elderly in this country. And there's we can do better with that. And we can start by honoring death as simply just as part of life. It's the extension of life. And in order to do that, we have to have a spiritual approach. And I don't mean religious. I mean being willing to have a philosophical conversation about what does it mean to be alive? And how do we live fully? And what part of life does death play? And I love that you brought up that conversation. It's fascinating.
It is a
Yeah.
beautiful, the
Yeah.
way you said it is a beautiful. I lived in a joint family. In fact, that's now I see that is breaking up. The societies are now we are importing in the India, also importing the Western process. This is really, we have to really revisit the whole humanity, the directions. That we are having a lot of problems. You see the entire mental health catastrophe is bigger than economic crisis now in the world. And how do we, I know you don't want to solve the entire world problem, but as you said, at individual level you can solve it and automatically
Yeah.
become a leader, and he solved the problem by showing them. So tell us a little bit about that. That you really touched my emotion in that sense, that how the death process is really how the older people treated in this country. I see that they're abused sometimes in the older homes. It is really sad to see.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit
Yeah.
a little bit. I want to expand on that one more minute on that.
Yeah. So you mean specifically around facing death or around?
Or people who are, how do you, personally, how do you deal with it? Suppose
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
going to die, and how do you
Yeah.
deal with a lot of cancer patients, for example?
Yeah. So, from this, I learned lessons from experts in what's called palliative care. And and there are doctors who focus on being with people who are dying. One of my favorite authors and thinkers in this area of death and dying, her name is Joan Halifax. And Joan Halifax is a Buddhist nun.
Okay, no, you're still there. You're still there. Sorry.
Yeah, yeah, and she's a Buddhist nun. And what she says, Ramana, to answer your question is, you know, being with death requires two things. It requires a soft belly, which means a willingness to be vulnerable with someone who's experiencing death or suffering, but also a firm spine, a firm back. We can't get carried away when someone else is in the dying process and completely lose ourselves because it's not really about us. And so there's this interesting combination that's required of being with someone who's dying. Being with dying requires we can both hold our own ground without getting washed away in grief, but at the same time, we don't close ourselves off so much that the other person can't feel our love.
I'm so impressed by you, Dr. Fisher. You're really a true leader. Without naming yourself as a leader, you're truly a leader. Naomi,
Thank you.
Naomi McFarland is from Australia. She's joining. Do you have any questions a little bit, Naomi, that you're a fan of Dr. Jonathan Fisher?
Wow, first of all, I just want to say thank you very much, Romana and Jonathan. Wow, what an incredible webinar and webcast it's been so far. I guess my questions, Jonathan, one of the things just listening would be, and I'm a bit of an optimist, I suppose, with the advancements in AI. I'm actually excited about the opportunity, whereas perhaps from where doctors are sitting, they might be concerned, oh, what am I going to do with the rest of my life if AI comes in into play? But I'm actually excited about that opportunity for them. First of all, because of the burnout and so on and so forth, but also I think it's an opportunity to explore. I think it has the potential to actually take the medical profession to the next level of healthcare, and integrate, as you were talking about, with businesses and so on and so forth, with doctors and the medical professions, removed from the day-to-day kind of things
What
of
is the
what
question,
would happen.
Naomi? What question
Yeah,
you have,
yeah.
Naomi?
What I'm saying is, that in terms of heart and health and educating people how to be human and better human with those skills, do you see that there would be opportunities there? What are your thoughts surrounding that? Do you think that that's something that the medical profession would be interested in achieving? Because in that, sorry, Romana, one moment, because in that way, that may enable support to our businesses as well. And do you think that's something the medical professionals would be interested in?
Yeah. Yeah. In terms of using artificial intelligence or technology to help enhance our humanity, it's an interesting question. And I alluded to it a little bit before in that experiment, showing that AI can express empathy often better than humans. And so one way that we will become better humans, in a sense, is by learning the best practices of human empathy, which means when someone else is suffering, to acknowledge their suffering, to ask them how they're feeling, to make statements that we can identify the feelings in another person. So I think that AI, in a sense, can help us be better at being human in a way. And that's a fascinating question.
Thank you, Dr. Fisher. You're a truly enlightenment for all of us. You're bringing a new enlightenment to the Western world from Eastern philosophy. We really, I'm truly honored to have you and privileged to have you. It is a wonderful conversation. We went beyond fit time, but thank you for your time and really just one heart, right? Can you tell us a little bit about your book?
Yeah, I have one of my copies right here. So Just One Heart. This is representing a lotus flower. A lotus flower grows in mud, but it can expose the most beautiful parts of it. And I believe that even though a heart may go through a lot of suffering and struggle, if we nurture it with what it needs, which is connection, it can really blossom. And so Just One Heart is based in the principles of positive psychology, which is human flourishing, and how psychology affects physiology. In other words, how our thoughts, beliefs, and feelings affect the human heart itself. And it's filled with practices on how to optimize our lives.
It is available on Amazon, and also audiobook is coming up, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fisher. It's truly an honor, and particularly is my very personal to me because you're a son of a physicist and a physician. That cross section is really truly fascinating, and then that is very emotional in that sense connection there. Thank you so much, Dr. Fisher.
Thank you very much, Ramana. This is a real pleasure, and thanks for all you do.
Thank you so much, Pablo.
telling their stories through our patented designs that can be worn on scrubs, t-shirts, printed on conference bags, and endless other promotional materials. Daily Wear for Medicine is the first ever of its kind to create curiosity in medicine through visual art. We at MedBricks are celebrating unsung heroes of the past who made enormous contributions to the field of medicine through our unique campaign called Daily Wear for Medicine. You can wear it, carry it, and give it.